Good morning, everyone. That's impressive. Okay, you guys must be excited or something. I mean, Tom doesn't get that. All right, for all of those of you who don't know, I am the new youth pastor. I've been here a couple months now. This is my first time up here on the platform, so I'm going to take a little bit, share a little bit about me. Why not? So I am Bailey. I graduated with a youth and family degree from Mount Vernon Nazarene University in 2023. I then very quickly got married to my beautiful wife, Taylor, who had graduated a year before me. So that is us, and then that's a picture of our dog, who is lovely. And then we also have a cat, and if I didn't talk about the cat, then Taylor would get mad at me, so we do have a cat. And then here is my family. This is my youngest brother, Bennett, and then the next in line, Braxton, and then this is the one that's actually close to me, who just graduated college, Bryson. Some of you have had the chance to get to know him. He's killing it. He moved to Dixon, Tennessee, which is right outside of Nashville, and it's so funny because he's living with my great aunt who has dementia, and he's basically being her full-time caretaker, which I'm good for him. He's killing it. It's not something I thought he was ever going to do, not something I want to do. This is my mom, Kendra, and my dad, Vince, and if you look around, you might see a couple of these people here, but that's not stressful at all or anything. All right, but well, thank you. It's not, but not what today's message is about, which you don't want to hear more about me, so that's fine. So I want to start with just a thought, and then I'm going to follow it up with a question that I just want you guys to think about as I go into the rest of the message. So thought is being tired. If we get tired, that's normal. That's a regular part of life, is being tired. And that's an interesting thought, because the most basic definition of tired, is we do work all day, we're tired, we need to sleep to function. If you really don't sleep, if you manage to force yourself to stay awake for several days straight, good things don't happen. And I'm sure we've all maybe experienced that. So, but just to remind us, I'm sure most of us have heard this passage of Scripture, but just to remind us what God says about us and creation, I'm gonna jump to Genesis 1. And we probably all know this passage, but I'm going to jump to Genesis 1 and read 27 through 31. So if you want to flip with me, you can. You can listen. Like I said, this is pretty well known, so it's just a reminder so that we can say, this is how we were created, and this is how God intended for this to be. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds over the heavens, and every other living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and every beast of the earth, and every bird of the heavens, and everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life. I have given every green plant for food," and it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and morning on the sixth day. And then the seventh day God rested. But we're not quite there yet. So, my question is, if we say that God has created us and it is very good, and we have to sleep to function, and a product of sleep is being tired, our body tells us we need to sleep by being tired, then do we feel good when we're tired? Has anybody been like, "I am so tired," and said it and not been complaining? I don't know. That is pretty intriguing. I was like, I don't think I've ever. Oh, okay. But there's definitely I think I felt good sometimes when I've worked really hard and I know I've accomplished something. That's when you feel good tired. But most of the time, that's not the case, right? And so I want you to just think about that question as we jump into a little bit of an example that I'm going to share. I've been blessed. I get to be a youth pastor. I get to deal with amazing teens. A little bit more about myself, I guess. Sorry, I told you I wasn't going to tell you more about me. But I have been in Mansfield for 5 years pastoring. And for those of you who don't know the Mansfield area, it's not necessarily known for its greatness in any way, shape, or form. It's mostly known for drugs and rehab and disability and those kind of things. So I was blessed to be at a church where we got to interact with a lot of that. Almost every family in our church was somehow involved in the foster care system. So most of the teens that were in my youth group and kids that I got to deal with were in the foster care system, have been adopted, were going to go into foster care, were in a program that was a preventative foster care program. So that is the background, and oftentimes when I get to be with those teens, maybe even the fun stuff that should be really fun, for me, might be more stressful. They may never know it, and I hope they never know that I'm stressed, but I might be a little more stressed than the other youth pastors that are at camp with me because their kids are angels. Not really. Everybody has their own problems, but oftentimes that wasn't the case in my experience. So even though, with all that, it might be a little obvious, I don't necessarily get to sleep a whole lot at, let's say, teen camp. It's a week long, and I know going into it that I'm not really sleeping the whole week. I might average 3-4 hours a night. And that's just because I don't really know what's going to happen. It could be, I got to make sure my teens are asleep before I can sleep, and that might take a long time. I've had a lot of different scenarios, and it's not even always the teens' fault. Sometimes I got to worry about if their parents are going to show up. And so I don't get a lot of sleep. And by day 3, I'm quite exhausted. Now, I don't share that as a complaint because I actually love teen camp and any kind of retreats to go on. It is my favorite. I look forward to it probably more than the teens look forward to it, just because I know what can happen, and they might not quite realize what can happen, but I know what can happen. And so, despite all that, I would say that when I'm at camp, and then even afterwards when I'm sleeping for 3 straight days, that I am rested. And that's a weird thought. But there's only really one reason that could possibly be. Now, we've talked a little bit about what I'm going to get into the past couple weeks, which is good. I'm glad that we're talking about this. But the one simple reason that I can go into teen camp feeling rested, I can sleep not at all really, and feel rested, and I can come home and be happy and be rested even while I'm like a zombie for the first couple of days, is Jesus. Jesus gives me energy. Jesus gives me the patience oftentimes when there, and just gives me the ability to show grace and no matter what the situation is. And so I was reminded of Tom's sermon a couple weeks ago where he talked about walking with the Spirit and walking in the Holy Spirit. And, he could come home and just be so filled with the Holy Spirit that one of his children could just kick him in the shins. And he'd be like, "Are you having a rough day, buddy?" Versus the opposite, where he's all in himself, and the same happens, and he just has to remove himself for a little bit. So that came to me while I was talking, and I was like, "Oh, that's perfect. That's a perfect example of what it looks like to walk in the Spirit." For me, though, that's the easy part. Just my personality when I'm at camp, when I'm coming to church, I'm excited. When I am doing an event, those are the times where I'm so excited. I've poured so much time and just energy into, Jesus, how do you want this event to go? How do you all the pieces, show me all the pieces, get me to meet the people I can meet, those kind of things. And so that's the easy part, right? When I'm walking in the Spirit in those moments, it's easy. And I feel like I can take anything that is thrown my way. The hardest parts, though, when I don't feel rested, when I feel tired, and I'm complaining about being tired, is actually the flip side. So often when I'm just at home, I hate being at home by myself. Sometimes Taylor goes to work for what feels like 3 or 4 straight days because she works at the hospital in the ER room just doing all sorts of people. So she works crazy hours sometimes. And so, and then, or when it's just like weeks and weeks of just like kind of mundaneness or like routine is like my least favorite word on the planet. I understand that it has good things and I like routines, but also it's like get up and do the same thing every day drives me nuts. I could literally never work a like a job where I was doing that. And I've been blessed not to have to, but there are times where I do. And these are the moments where I feel the most tired because they're the moments for me where it feels like I might not need Jesus to get me through these days in my mind. So like doing a daily devotional, doing these kind of things, man, those are always the hardest things for me to get done and feel like, man, I'm really walking in the Spirit today, right? And so, and I bet a lot of you might feel the same way, or a lot of you might feel the opposite, where, routine is great. I can do my daily devotions every morning, and this is when I'm walking in the Spirit, when I'm here doing this, this, and this. But going to church, going to a teen event with teens, never in a million years. I encourage all of you to. It's phenomenal. Just letting you know. I'll take any of you. It's great. It is life-changing, seriously. But that's a different message on serving in youth ministry. But it's fine. So I want to look at Matthew 11, and just verses 28 through 30. And I have it on the screen. They are going to, so if you want to turn to it, you can. But this is going to be the just Jesus sharing. He and the disciples have just been kind of bouncing all over Galilee, teaching in different places. And he gets to a point where he's sharing and he's talking, and he just shares something that seems so simple. And for whatever reason, it becomes so difficult for us in our daily walks. So, verse 28, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This is in the CSV, by the way, or ESV, which is what the Bibles are in the chairs. So I just thought I'd let you know. Come to me, all who labor. I would argue that most of us labor in some way, shape, or form. We looked at Genesis, and part of we're made to work. And so, but is work labor, and is labor work? I'll let you decide that. But I would say that we all labor in some form or fashion, whether that be, me dealing with teens, you sitting behind a desk all day, somebody working in a construction field, somebody taking... I could go on there's hundreds and thousands of different kinds of crazy jobs that you might consider as labor. However, that's not quite. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden." Now, heavy laden is a very specific term. However, I would assume that most of us, if I said, how many of you have ever felt heavy laden? I probably should see more hands than that. But if we're honest, and I have to go, okay. And Jesus says, "And I will give you rest." If you simply come to Jesus. And if it's that easy, why does our society and our world today look like everyone is heavy laden? Why does it, if you just take a step back and you say, oh, that guy, that problem, this issue, those things, I would say it looks like this. Our mental health in our world today, you don't even have to, but heavy laden is a good way to put it. Now, I would say that when I'm feeling heavy laden, I can almost go, this is a me problem. I gotta come to Jesus. And he'll give me the rest that I need. But how often are we able to share that with someone who is when is it the first thing in our mind when somebody's sharing how difficult their day was for us to go, oh, they're heavy laden. All they have to do is come to Jesus. How do I get them to do that? How do I convey that message? That thought rarely comes to my head. It actually I'm a problem solver. So usually, my wife will attest to this, usually I'm actually just like, okay, actually, so here's what you need to do. Instead of doing this, you need to do these 12 steps. But it's not that complicated most of the time, right? And Jesus gives us the really straightforward answer in this verse. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Well, I would assume that most of us in the room, and it's okay if you don't, but I would assume that most of us in the room would consider ourselves Christians. And to be a Christian is to be like Christ. So again, he's just reminding us, this is not a hard process. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Well, we're already supposed to be acting like Jesus as Christians, so we're already trying to learn from him. And to take Jesus' yoke upon him, well, what did Jesus do? Jesus died on the cross. Now, that might seem a little harder, though. Like, that one might seem a little difficult, but we'll get there. But Jesus says, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. So not only will you find rest, but you'll find real rest, like real, true, like you could do literally anything, physical, mental, emotional, and you will truly be rested. Because that's soul rest. That's what Jesus is asking. Now, who knows what a yoke is? Okay, good. When I was a teenager and I read this verse somewhere, it was actually, some of you actually might know this place if you're really involved in the Nazarenedom. This verse right here is plastered on the back of a sanctuary wall in these giant golden letters, and I said, that looks stupid. and I didn't know what yoke meant. I didn't necessarily grow up on a farm where we had animals that, I'm not that old, so this really doesn't exist in modern farming. Now, if you go to the Amish, if you're ever in some Amish country, you can drive by and you can see that if it's planting season. So a yoke is this giant kind of wooden thing, but basically you put it on the shoulders of a horse, a pack animal of some sort, an ox if we're getting crazy in not in America, we don't necessarily do that, and they would then pull behind the plow, like the plow that is just a giant hook that's in the ground, and these animals are just like pulling it behind them. And then if you hit a rock, you have to stop, otherwise the plow will break. But it's not easy. That's why we make animals do it, right? If you were doing it, you probably wouldn't be able to walk for a couple days or use your arms or anything. But Jesus says that his yoke is easy, which is hilarious because it's the opposite of what pulling a yoke would be. So why is his yoke easy? Well, again, he's telling us it's simple. It's not hard. Because Jesus' yoke, and part of everything that he stands for, is that he died for us on the cross. And that's why Jesus' yoke is easy, because he's already done it. So we don't have to pull the plow behind us, because Jesus already did that. So when Jesus says, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, it's because it truly is. And you don't necessarily need to die on the cross again, because he has already done it for us. So when we're heavy laden, it usually is because we haven't said, Jesus, I'm walking with you in this moment. I have your yoke on my shoulders. Instead, we're saying, hey, I got my own yoke on, and I know what's going on. But clearly, if you feel that way, you just take a step back and go, oh, I'm missing it. Because real rest is found when you walk with Jesus and not in your own strength. Now, I cannot talk about rest without using this word. And this is the Sabbath. Now, if you've never been in a church, you probably have never heard this word, and that's okay. I'm going to tell you what it means. The literal dictionary definition of Sabbath is a day of religious rest, for Jews usually on Friday through Saturday, like Friday afternoon through Saturday. But for most Christians, on Sunday. Now, there's a lot of historical and biblical reasons to that I'm not going to jump into, but because it's not necessarily important for this. But what it really means is it's a day of rest and worship. And that's how most of our Christian world would look at it. And that's what that means. The Sabbath is a Sunday. You know, there's a reason that Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays. If you've never put that together, it's a Christian organization, and they're holding to the Sabbath. Now, I won't jump into whether that's really what's going on, but that's the ideal. And I love that. So, and we all jump back to Sabbath. And like I said, from creation, God rested on the seventh day. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I don't think God needed to take a nap after he created 6 days. You know, like he did it all like that. And so what? So why did he do that? Why is it in the Bible that he rested on the seventh day? Because if it wasn't important, and if you really just needed to take a nap, then it wouldn't need to be in the Bible. Because it would just be like, have you ever written something or, you know, thought about something or read something about some awesome guy doing something really cool and then talk about how he napped afterwards? Because I never have. I've never watched a movie or read a book or a documentary like that. So, why does God rest on the seventh day? To show us that we need to rest and that it is okay to rest. And when we get into the New Testament, and if you've read anything from the four Gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, tell the story of Jesus, there's a group of people that take this Sabbath and they say, let's just make it a bunch of rules. I don't know about y'all, but in Genesis, there's no rules. God didn't necessarily throw out all these lists and regulations on what you can and can't do on the Sabbath. Now, there's some stuff in law books, but we see that Jesus almost immediately is countering what these guys called the Pharisees are saying in the New Testament. So I'm gonna paraphrase and read parts of John 5, 1 through 15. So if you want to jump to it, that would be great because it's a really cool little story. One of my favorites that Jesus does this really unique thing. One of the more unique scenarios. Well, not really. Jesus did a lot of healing. I won't lie. So there's this. Jesus and the disciples, they're moving around. They're headed towards Jerusalem. And then they get into Jerusalem, and they're by the sheep gate. Now, there was a bunch of gates, so it was cool because you can map out Jerusalem. But there's a pool, and it's called, and I want to say this is called Bethsaida. You can correct me later if I'm wrong. All these people are here. They're all sick of some sort. And this pool is known for healing people. Now, when the water bubbles up, if somebody gets in the pool, they get healed. So there's this guy laying here, and Jesus comes to this place. And there's this guy laying here, and we don't know a ton about him. We just know that it says he's been an invalid for 38 years. Now, that doesn't mean he's necessarily 38 years old. That doesn't necessarily mean he's been an invalid his whole life. We don't even necessarily know exactly what invalid is descriptive of, other than he has a lot of struggle moving, And so it says, Jesus comes up to him. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am going, another always steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." Well, I mean, if I was this guy, I'd be like, "You're crazy," but he does it. And I don't know about y'all, but this is probably not an air mattress. It's probably some sort of just like mat that he had been laying on. So, I mean, he rolls it up, probably, something along those lines. This is not a big object, not a heavy object, probably something kind of like that. Well, the Pharisees see him. They're in Jerusalem. They're around the temple, and the Pharisees see him. And they go, hold on. What are you doing, dude? What are you doing? And he's like, what do you mean? And they're like, you can't do that. And he's like, Like, I'd be like, do what? What do you mean? First of all, I'd just be so overjoyed. And I'm assuming this guy was, because he's walking. He's moving for the first time in 38 years. And the Pharisees are probably have seen this guy laying on a mat. Now, and they have the audacity to be like, hey, you can't do that. And he's like, I'd be like, do what? What do you mean? Right? And they're like, you can't carry your bed. It's a Sabbath. That's illegal. And they're like, who told? And he goes, well, this guy told me I could do that, and I'm also walking. He's a rabbi. I'm confused. And they go, well, who told you could do that? They're not even worried anymore. They're like, who told you could do that? They're not worried about him carrying it anymore. They're just, who told you could do that? Because then we don't care about you anymore. We're going to go figure out who told you could do that so we can tell them that they can't do that. And he goes, well, I have no idea. I don't know. I didn't get his name. So then later, Jesus comes to him and says, hey, don't sin anymore so that nothing more may happen to you. And somehow in that interaction, it says that he gets that it's Jesus. It doesn't say, he doesn't introduce himself, but somehow he does. And then, so then that guy goes and tells the Pharisees who he was. And the Pharisees are like, oh, dang it, that Jesus, man. And then they're really upset. And Jesus did all this on the Sabbath, which is all a part of the problem. So there's all these issues with Jesus doing things on the Sabbath. And I don't know about y'all, but if somebody was healed in church on a Sunday, I really, really hope you wouldn't be upset about it. So that's kind of Jesus' perspective. So I don't know about y'all, but did anybody grow up in the church and you couldn't do certain things on Sunday? Like mow the lawn or, go grocery shop. I don't know. I wasn't quite there, but I may have heard some stories. So, that is an interesting thing. I love mowing the lawn. I would literally do it all day long every day and just love it to death. So, and part of, for me, is just the rules and regulations on a Sunday are a very easy trap to get into. And when we look at the Pharisees and say, they're crazy, but then we look at, 20 years ago when I was a child, and those things were being said by rules and regulations. I don't know who. I wasn't there. But it's an interesting perspective. So remember when I said we're called to be like Jesus? And as Christians, we should imitate Jesus. And he says, do as I do. Well, that was one. Here are 9 other. Well, not 9 other because that one's in there. But here's 9 total. Specifically scriptures, and there are 9 different stories, no duplicates in here between the Gospels, 9 different stories of Jesus doing things on the Sabbath that the Pharisees did not agree with. And these say specifically on the Sabbath, or Jesus did this on the Sabbath. So not even just like, there's many more that are like, yeah, this was probably on the Sabbath because of this, and this. These are literally just the specific 9 where Jesus is doing this on the Sabbath. And it's super funny because, number 1, I'm not reading all these, by the way. That would take a long time. But I put them up there so that if you were interested, you can go and jump through. But so number 1, he's him and the disciples. They're walking through a field. It's one of my favorites. They pick some grain so that they can eat. But it's on Sunday, and that's work. It'd be like driving through a field. We have cornfields in Ohio, so not quite grain, but cornfields in Ohio. It'd be like you were driving through a field, corn was ready, you grabbed a couple cobs, and then out of nowhere, some dude in a robe shows up and he goes, you can't do that! As you're peeling the corn, it's like, my bad. Okay. And so there's a bunch, and so that's one, and then we have, teaching, casting out demons, teaching, healing and fellowship, healing and fellowshipping, and so we have this list of things that Jesus is doing that include basically working, that include teaching basically every Sunday, not to mention Jesus was in the synagogue every Sunday, and we have, he's with people every Sunday. So we have the one is he's in people's homes and those kind of things. So if we're called to be as Jesus is and do as Jesus did, and Jesus was doing all the things, specifically on the Sabbath, but also that day, but also resting. And that was what Jesus' definition of the Sabbath was and what Jesus' life looked like. We as pastors have all these things. Well, we don't take our Sabbath on Sunday because, well, we're working on Sunday. And I won't get into that, but it's a very hard differentiation to make when we kind of are doing everything in a week to lead up to what's happening on a Sunday or whatever the variation of pastor you might be. So we are usually encouraged to find another day that we have off that is rest. But we see that on the Sabbath, these are the things that Jesus is doing. And so if we're called to imitate what Jesus did on the Sabbath, and these are the restful things that Jesus is doing, I'm not an average church attender because I'm on staff at a church. So I can't say, well, my average church attendance looks like, and I'll just leave it there. But I would say that if every average church attender who told themselves they were a Christian was doing all of these things on a Sunday morning, or even just throughout the day, our churches might look a little different. We have the ability to do all these things, especially, Thad just spoke last week about healings and what we have the ability to do because of what Jesus did on the cross. So, Jesus, okay, so I do want to read one of these. I want to read just one verse, Matthew 12:8, which is our first one. And that says, Jesus is one of those things where the Pharisees are trying to say, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And Jesus, again, very simple. I love the simple things that Jesus says. Sometimes parables can be a little confusing, but that's also the point of parables. For the Son of Man is Lord over the Sabbath. And that just jumps us back to our original key verse, is if we're coming to Jesus and we're putting on Jesus' yoke, then we've already made the establishment that we're resting in Jesus. And if the Son of Man is Lord over the Sabbath, then whatever Jesus is calling us to do, we'll be rested. Now, I'm not saying don't take vacation. I'm not saying like you have a day off, you have to go plan a bunch of things with a bunch of people. I'm just saying simply that real rest is about our relationship with Jesus. And so if we are doing other things, like let's say, I have 6 hours before, Taylor's at work and it's the afternoon, so I could just play video games for 6 straight hours. May have done that many times. But that might not be, little conviction here, that might not be the best way to spend my 6 to 8 hours of time. Especially if I'm not communicating with people. Like sometimes I'm playing with people, and that's a little bit of a different story, but that's not necessarily what real rest looks like. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had a day off where you binged a whole Netflix show, and then afterwards you were like, ugh, it was a good show, but I just feel like crap. So that would be the definition of not real rest. Just letting you know, very practical example. So real rest is about our relationship with Jesus. And that looks like worship. That looks like community. So come to church. Little shout out here. Our B groups are awesome. That is exactly what community is. And that is about pulling people into our B groups that are not necessarily associated with our church and building a community. It has nothing to do with how large your group is. It has nothing to do with how large our church is. These are just chairs. Hopefully they're full because that means there's more people hearing Jesus and more people sharing Jesus. Real rest is about our relationship with Jesus. As I kind of said, rest is something that I've always struggled with, not necessarily because I don't have the time or whatever, but I struggle with rest in the sense of I always have to be doing something. I always have to be planning something. I always have to get something done. And if I'm not doing those things, then what the heck am I supposed to do with myself? Oftentimes, that just means it's all about me. And so I'm putting my own yoke on my shoulders, and everybody will have their own unique situations. So as the worship team comes, I just want you to remember that even when, like, there will always be things that we struggle with. And for me, I will always have to continue to remind myself that if I feel like that, if I feel like, oh, I got to do something, I got to plan something, I'm dragging, I'm drained, then I just have to remind myself, oh, I am not carrying Jesus' yoke. It is all about me right now. I would encourage us to, the front is open, by the way. I know that we don't have really nice, cushy altars with awesome knee pads, but the front is open, and Jesus often encourages us to come. And just ask Jesus, what should rest look like in my life? What might I need to change about my life to really find rest? And where and what are the things that I am trying to carry by myself instead of with Jesus?